North Korea spoke yesterday of watching U.S. behavior. They appeared to point specifically to joint U.S.-South Korea military exercises. Is there any consideration of making changes of U.S. behavior in that manner?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is some sort of a double freeze as we look at it here. There is no equivalency between what the DPRK has been engaged in, the ICBM missile tests in July, the two of those, the nuclear testing. Compare that to the legal activity that the U.S. and South Korea is engaged with in terms of its joint military exercises. Those joint military exercises have taken place for a very long time. They're carried out in the spirit of the October 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty. They're carefully monitored by the international community to ensure full compliance with the armistice agreement. So that so-called double freeze, that's not going to change. We're allowed to do it. We're allowed to do it with our ally, South Korea. We will continue to do that, and that's just not going to change.
Well, just because you're allowed to do it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do at a period of very heightened.
There's no moral equivalency whatsoever in the U.S. and South Korea doing joint military exercises.
Not suggesting that there
we do these things all around the world, joint military exercises.
Yeah, but I'm not suggesting that there is any equivalence at all. But it gets back to the earlier question. Not doing something, in this case, on your side, you don't think it's this. You look at it the same way as the North Koreans not doing it.
These have taken place since 1953 or thereabouts. It is an agreement that we have with the Republic of Korea. We remain open to dialogue with the North Koreans, as you well know. We are willing. No, not on this. Thank you. Thank you for asking that for clarification. On the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But this, there's no moral equivalency between our interactions with South Korea and what the DPRK has done. And the international world, the world recognizes what DPRK is doing is unstable, it's unsafe, and it's flat out wrong.
Korea.
I'm sorry, why what?
Why didn't do military actions immediately when they threatening U.S. and our land?
Why didn't we undertake military actions to do so? Well, we believe that diplomacy deserves a chance. This is still a new administration, actually 8 months now into this administration. The Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis penned a joint editorial that ran in yesterday's Wall Street Journal in which they talked about that they're on the same page, believe firmly that diplomacy can solve this. However, we're prepared, as we are in every situation around the globe, to switch to another plan if that is absolutely necessary. That's a DOD issue, so I'm going to stay away from that. But we believe that diplomacy is a solution here.
Yeah, one more. South Korea. Yesterday, President Moon Jae-in of South Korea said that remark that no one can military action on the Korean Peninsula without the South Korean government permissions. What is the U.S. position of this?
We have a good relationship, as you know, with the Republic of Korea. We have constant, ongoing conversations with that government. What you propose there is another hypothetical situation, which I'm not going to get into, but we continue to have conversations with the Republic of Korea on a near constant basis.
What if North Korean Kim Jong Un sudden attack South Korea? Can the United States engage in the military?
As you know, South Korea is an ally of ours, and as we do with our allies and friends, we pledge to protect them as well.
In your assessment, does the United States see a gradual change of China's attitude toward North Korea? Do you think they see North Korea more of a liability than asset?
I think, and we saw this about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, when China voted in support of the UN Security Council resolution. We were really pleased to see them take that step. The Secretary and others have had frequent conversations with the Chinese. As you know, President Trump spoke with President Xi over the weekend, and they talked about our mutual agreement that DPRK is up to no good, and that is a security risk not for the region but the world. So we are asking them to do more, as we have. They're North Korea's primary trading partner. We believe that they have unique leverage to put pressure on North Korea, and they've committed to us that they're going to follow through with those UN Security Council resolutions and making sure that those are adhered to from their endpoint. And so we look forward to having them hold up their part of the bargain.
So do you see their action in the United Nations Security Council as an indication of their gradually, slowly change of attitude?
I think it's trending in the right direction. It's trending in the right direction. And then President Trump and President Xi had a nice conversation over the weekend discussing that very thing as well.
And then finally, you just mentioned there's not a lot more North Korea can do to resume the talk. Just for a good soundbite, could you flesh out what else, what a lot more they should do and then not to do?
Well, North Korea would have to take some very serious steps and show us that they are serious about its interest and intent in denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. They would have to do a lot more of that. Secretary Tillerson has talked about that extensively. He's also said, I'm not going to negotiate my way back to the negotiating table, and North Korea knows exactly what it needs to do. Let's get serious about it. Okay. Hey.
It's not really a hypothetical. What do your agreements with South Korea say? Do you have to get their permission to launch any sort of strike?
Some of those things are diplomatic conversations, and some of those would involve the Department of Defense, so I just don't want to get into that.
But I mean, if he says you can't without his permission, you're not going to respond.
I'm not going to get into that. Okay, I'm not a part of that conversation that the U.S. military may be having with South Korea on that point. But they are a valuable ally of ours, as you well know, and we defend our allies. Okay.
I'm confused what President Moon remarked yesterday, because U.S. and South Korea is an alliance, but he not want to be war in Korean Peninsula. But however, U.S. is supposed to be involved with the war when North Korean Kim Jong Un attacked South Korea. But why he discouraged it? But
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the last part.
President Moon doesn't want a war in the Korean Peninsula.
Well, no one does. No one does. We don't want that.
Yes,
President Moon doesn't want that. Japan doesn't want that.
Exactly.
No one wants that. And that is why we are so pushing hard on this diplomacy campaign. I mean, the number one thing you hear me talk about here, the number one thing you hear Secretary Tillerson talk about is goals and efforts to try to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, getting Kim Jong Un to give up those illegal weapons, getting him to stop with his destabilizing activities. It's a priority, obviously, at the United Nations and the UN Security Council, where they had the unanimous vote on that matter. It's a top issue for our friends and allies and partners around the world.
This is not between U.S. and North Korea problem. This is actually the problem is the South Korea affected. But the Moon thought this is your guys' problem. That's not. How did you?
I'm sorry,
think
is
about
this
it?
our problem?
I mean,
I'm not understanding the question.
Between the U.S. and North Korea problem, do you think this is between the U.S. and North Korea
Is this
problem?
issue between the United States and North Korea? No. This is between North Korea. This is between North Korea and the world. It is not the United States standing here alone expressing concern about the activities of Kim Jong Un's regime. And by the way, it's a good opportunity to remind people what it's like for North Koreans to live under that regime. Okay, that is not a free and fair country. It is not a country where people have ample food, opportunity. It's not a country where people can come and go as they please. It's a country where they're starving their own people. They're engaged in forced abortions. Pardon me for talking about that, but that is a very grim reality there, where people are living in labor camps. It's under horrific situations. This is not between the United States and North Korea. It is the world looking at North Korea and condemning North Korea and the Kim Jong Un. This is not about the population there, the regular folks. This is about what Kim Jong Un is doing, not only to the world, but to his
Is it still the position of
own.
the administration that the North Koreans have to do something other than just say we want to talk before you'll sit down with them?
I think so. I mean, the secretary, I think, was pretty clear about that today. Just a couple days ago, he spoke about this as well. He said, look, we'll talk, but they have to take some serious steps. Susan Thornton, our acting assistant secretary for East Asia Pacific, who's been very engaged with the secretary on this issue, has said the same thing. Look, we're willing to sit down and talk with them, but it appears that that's not going to happen imminently. They have to take some serious steps before we get there.
Does not doing something count as a step?
I think they would have to be a little bit more clear. And again, when Kim Jong Un talked about Guam, that again is a hypothetical of sorts.
Right.
So they would have to do a lot more.
Well, okay, so just to be clear, not launching ballistic missiles towards Guam is not enough for you guys to talk with them?
I feel like that's sort of a question that my child might propose. You know, if my child were to say, "Hey, Mom, if I don't steal this cookie, will you then give me television?" Well, no, the answer is no on that one. I think we
Okay.
can all relate to that.
Are you suggesting then that Kim Jong Un is
No,
a child?
I am not suggesting. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting it's such an extreme hypothetical to reward someone for not doing something.
Well, right, but
Yeah.
so what, in other words, then, must they do affirmatively or positively?
And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I mean, the secretary has been clear about we will see it. They know what they need to do to get us to come to the negotiating table. We are willing to have talks about this. This is obviously a very serious matter. Cookies and children aside, a serious matter. They know what they need to do, and the secretary has said we're not going to negotiate our way back to the negotiating
Okay,
table.
so just to put the finest point on it possible, you're not going to go and sit down with them unless they take steps that they know that they have to do. That's just them saying we're open or we're not. We're going to hold off on sending missiles towards Guam is not going to get you interested in having a dialogue.
I think they
That is
would have
correct?
to do quite a bit more.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Dave. Hey.
Hi. If they know what they have to do, what's the problem in us knowing what they have to do?
Some of these would involve, private diplomatic conversations that we have with our friends in the region. I think the main point here is that the U.S., along with our partners and allies, we're all on the same page. We're talking with a whole lot of countries about this pressure campaign, and nothing has changed.
So if they know what they have to do and their allies, so South Korea and Japan know what they have to do, it's only the U.S. people and our readers who don't know what they have to do?
Look, Kim Jong Un, we would like to have talks with him when the time is right, when they show that they are serious about an effort to move toward denuclearization. We have not seen that yet. Remember, and let me go back to this again, 2 nuclear tests last year, 2 ICBM tests in a month alone. We have not seen that they've been serious at this point. Okay.
So,
Hi, Syed.
if they say that we will no longer launch missiles over Guam or into that area, into the Pacific, that would not be enough? I just want to understand you correctly.
I think I answered that question. Again, this can get into
but
extreme hypothetical situation, and I don't want to get into that.
Because they said that,
I
they were
understand.
specific. They said we're going to launch a missile on that region or in that area. So if they say we will no longer do that, that is not
And I think we're
sufficient.
not going to respond to every single threat and every single hypothetical.
So, with everybody assuming that North Korea has nuclear weapons, and some say, in fact, put a figure on it, like 50 or 56 or something. So do they have to say, okay, this is what we have, we want to denuclearize it before you could talk with them?
They would have to show some serious steps and some serious indications that they would be willing to sit
Suggesting
down.
the rocket engines powering the recent successful ICBM tests in North Korea came from a state-owned Ukrainian factory. Is the State Department aware of that? Are those reports, and do you have any comments?
Yeah, we're certainly aware of those reports that have come out. That's an issue that we would take very seriously if that were to be the case. One of the things I do want to mention about this is that no single country has done more to curtail these ambitions of North Korea than the United States. There have been a lot of UN Security Council resolutions, and they obligate all nations, including Ukraine, to prevent transfers of sensitive technology to the DPRK. In the past, I know that Ukraine has prevented the shipments of some sensitive materials to nations that we would be certainly very concerned about. We have a good, solid relationship with Ukraine. As you know, President Poroshenko was over here a couple months ago, meeting with the president, also meeting with Secretary Tillerson. As a general matter, we don't comment on intelligence reports. Ukraine, though, we have to say, has a very strong non-proliferation record, and that includes specifically with respect to the DPRK.
Just directly to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Ukraine today have confirmed that the rockets did come from the factory, but they say they were made before.
I'm sorry, who confirmed this?
The Ukrainian government confirmed it did come from their factory, but before 2001, when they were part of the Soviet Union. And they say those rocket motors were transferred to what is now Russian control.
Yeah, I don't have any information about that particular report. I'm not aware of what you say that the Ukrainian government has just said. If I have anything on that for you, I'll get it to you, but I'm not familiar with that. Okay. Anything else on this? Okay. Let's stick with North Korea, clean out North Korea, then we'll go somewhere else.
We just,
Meaning, let's finish that topic before we move on to something else. Okay. I just want to be clear.
we
Yeah,
just
go
talked
ahead.
about China's support for the latest UN resolution. China has supported past UN sanctions resolutions on North Korea, but the actual enforcement of those sanctions has been wanting. How much time would the U.S. sort of allow to pass before you kind of reassess whether China's actually serious about this resolution this time, and before you may start to consider secondary sanctions on Chinese companies, which I think Secretary Tillerson has hinted at, Susan Thornton hinted at as well.
Secondary sanctions have been put in place against some Chinese companies, as you're well aware, and I believe individuals as well. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. It took many, many years to get to this very concerning point with North Korea. It's going to take some time to try to resolve this as well. We'll continue the conversations with China. Let me read you a little bit about one of the things that Secretary Tillerson said in some meetings in Manila just about a week ago. He said, he talked about China and Russia being helpful on the issue of North Korea. He said, I know that they are having talks as well with representatives from North Korea. I think that is evidence that they have a very good open channels of communication to be able to talk with the regime of North Korea. And we hope that they will be encouraging them to stand down their program and abide by UN Security Council resolutions, which both China and Russia have voted for in the past. So I'm hopeful that they will use their influence, and they think they do have influence with the regime to bring them to the point of dialogue, but with the right expectation of what that dialogue would include. So again, these are ongoing conversations, and I don't want to put a timeline on it, but we're having a lot of those conversations.